All right, so the topic is different ways to put a speech together, different orders you can use. So this is Comm 101 quick tip on topical order. Get it? Tip? Tip of the hat? Yeah. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel now. So we're going to talk about ways that you can set up your speeches. And this one's a pretty interesting one. It's called topical order. And you're going to see a really good example of this, and we'll compare it to another way we could do it. But in topical order, you take your main points and divide them into logical and consistent subtopics. So you may have one main topic you want to talk about, but you're going to talk about different areas. You sort of could do the same thing when we were talking about Bonnaroo. But for the example, we'll talk about Josephine Baker. Now, I don't know if y'all know who Josephine Baker even was. She was a real person, very famous during the early middle 1900s. And she, if we're going to talk about her in topical order, then we're going to talk about three major contributions that she had in her lifetime. So she was an incredible entertainer in France, in Paris, during the early part of the 1930s. She became wildly famous in Europe, and she was actually an American. And she was living in Paris, doing vaudeville type stuff in Paris, hugely popular. And when the Nazis invaded France, they wanted to utilize her because everybody knew who she was. And if they could get her to be on their side, they felt that it would be easier for them to control France because everybody loved Josephine Baker. And if she appeared to get along well with the Nazis, then the French would follow suit. So, wildly huge entertainer. And she had a very successful entertaining career. She was a great singer. She could dance, she could act. She was just really, really popular for her time. That's one topic about Josephine Baker. But another topic about Josephine Baker, and this one's really interesting because it utilizes that topic we just talked about, and that is that she was an incredibly valuable asset to the French underground during World War II. So, as I said, the Nazis come into France. They want to get Josephine Baker to appear to be on their side. Josephine Baker does that. She appears to be on their side. She's smoozing with all the high-ranking people from the Nazi army that come in, and she's around them all the time. What they don't know is she is working for the French underground. So she is actually working as a spy, and she was one of the more famous but unknown at the time spies during World War II. And because of her closeness with all of these high ranking German officers, she was able to find out and relay an awful lot of information to the French underground, who and then relayed it to the Allied armies in World War II. So, very cleverly used her entertainer status to be a incredibly useful spy in World War II, and her efforts helped the Allied forces win World War II. So that's two massive topics about her. The third one, completely unrelated somewhat, Josephine Baker, I didn't mention, was an African American. And when Martin Luther King was assassinated, at that particular time, she had been back in the US. She was very heavily involved in the civil rights movement. And when Martin Luther King was assassinated, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's wife, and some of the other civil rights leaders met with Josephine Baker and asked her to become the voice and the face of the civil rights movement, to step in where Martin Luther King had been. And she continued to be heavily involved in the civil rights movement, but she chose not to be the face of civil rights because she felt she'd spent too much time in Europe and she was maybe a little bit too old in her opinion. And she thought they needed a younger, fresher face than hers, but she was still very heavily involved in civil rights. So in her lifetime, she basically had like three major lifetimes. She was an entertainer, she was an incredibly valuable spy in World War II, and she was a civil rights leader. And so you could present her life in topical order, and the topics being entertainer, spy, civil rights leader. You could just as easily said, no, I'm going to do this chronological and talk about her growing up and moving to France and becoming an entertainer and then progressing into being a spy and then later on being a civil rights leader. You could talk about those, and but you would have to present it in that order, right? If you do it in topical, you could go backwards if you wanted to. You could start with civil rights and then go backwards into World War II and her being a spy, and then go back to her being an entertainer. And you could make it very interesting. And you could sort of do that Quentin Tarantino thing I mentioned in the other quick tip and add some intrigue and some interest into it that you couldn't do using other possible orders. So the topical order can be a very interesting way to present a speech topic. That's it for now.